All right, I've been saying for some time that I want to show how I do my 402 and 201 surface mount LEDs. Um, First of all, you're going to want some experience with just soldering. The way I solder is many people use flux, and I think it's just preference. I've had the best luck with rosin core. I know many people brush the flux on separately, and I'm not quite sure in some of these smaller instances how I might do that. But if you find a way that works, then I'm not trying to change what works for you. So I've prepared two wires, and it may be a bit hard to see, but what I've done is this end is at least a 1/4 inch. Um, this wire happens to be the Circuitron ultrafine wire. It has 4 strands in it, and it's the thinnest wire I found outside of like magnet wire, where you just scrape the edge off until you get to the conductor. I've used that on signals, but this is how I would prepare. First, I'm going to have my wire like this, and I'm using a solder station. I believe it's pronounced Heiko, and I always just turn it full blast. And I know a lot of you are probably going to be like, oh, full blast. All right, so what I've done here, since the center of the solder, and you really can't see it, but if you looked at it up close, under some magnification, you'd see the center has flux in it. So I've prepared one end of the wire. The other end is just stripped and twisted. I always do the strip and twist. And I'm always wiping off the tip to make sure it's very clean and that there's not any old solder. I want new flux and new solder to go on this wire. I'm going back and forth a few times here. I don't want to leave a blob on it. Okay, that's pretty. Not sure why it smoked quite as much. Probably because I got a lot of solder and a lot of flux on the end there. And I don't know for a fact, but I think the flux will burn off if you hold it for too long. So I've prepared my two wires. Now this is going to be the trick. That little dot looking thing on there, that's my index finger pointing at it. That's the 201 surface mount LED. Now what I have here, this is a very generic magnifier. I have to use that for sure. And it does a lot, but it's not magnifying quite as much as you might think. I'm seeing, well, my eyes don't focus anymore. I'm 56, so I can't get as close as I'd like to and still focus. And these help me just get closer. Now I keep wiping this because the end, you want it nice and clean the way it's shown there. And what I do is I'll put just a tiny bit of solder on the end there, and then I'm going to come in there. I just tapped the end of the LED. So I'm going to do it again, but on the metal, okay? And it's just like, you don't want much solder on there. I'm going to do that again, and hopefully it shows up. There. Just enough where it just kind of, it's not a ball, it's just almost the least amount you can put on there. And then you hover over where you want to be, and then come down, touch, release. And it even left a little bit of solder on here. It dries really fast because this is cold. Now, when I did this, and it's almost to be expected, that is a very small LED. So when I came down and touched it, because this is what is called tinning the wires when I put the solder on both wire. I also do this too. I guess you'd call it tinning, preparation, whatever. But when I did it, even though I put a tiny bit on there, it bridged. And what that means is the solder is now over both contacts, even though I only used a tiny bit. But not to worry. You take the tip of your solder iron and come back and tap it again. Make sure there's no solder on it. Okay, now we're back in business. Because when the end of the solder tip is clean, it's going to attract. You don't have to use like desolder braid. This is too delicate. You can't do those kind of things here. So what I'm going to do is I will take the wire and I want to put a bit of a bend. I'll put it between my fingers like so and practice a few times, bringing it down where it's going to be flat on the surface. You don't want it sticking up. You don't want it sticking too far down. You want to get it as close to the end of your fingers as possible. The less this distance, the more control you have. If it's out here like this, any tiny movement of your fingers back here, it's going to exaggerate it down here. It's like trying to hold a yardstick and flip on a light switch with it, if you catch my drift. So what we want to do here, and I'm not quite there, and my wife is recording this. She's not going to be able to get the detail of it, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So I am shooting for attaching right about where I'm at here. You don't want it right on the insulation because the insulation will bunch up and kind of move backward and bulge. And there's not as much solder there. I don't want to do it way down on this end because then you have all this uninsulated wire and it defeats the trick that I use. What I'm doing is when I put it in about this position, I'm going to go for the outer leg furthest away from me first. What this allows me to do is put my solder iron way out here on the end. And when I do that, the heat wicks its way up the wire to the solder that's on the pad of the LED and the solder that's already on the wire. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I don't have anything to be able to magnify this with. So again, I'm like always wiping the tip because as soon as it starts to turn like a yellow and brown, it kind of doesn't want to pick up the solder as well. So it's okay if she doesn't pick this up perfectly. So I come on the end. I'm applying heat to the wire. And then what's really important is when you're looking for the solder to pool. And sometimes you can even see as it goes up the wire. This takes practice. It's done. What you want to do is make sure when your tip of your solder iron is on the wire that you pull away. Do not lift. Capillary attraction, if you lift, it's going to lift the wire with it. And then you've just disconnected your solder. Now to test my solder, there's not much strength on that pad at all. But what I do is I typically just lift the wire like that. And you see that the LED came with it. At this point, I'm going to call it good. And it did melt into the tape a little bit. And I didn't discuss how I did that. So this excess out here, again, I put the heat down here on the end. It is going to wick its way up. And that allows you a little bit of time. And you want to put all your focus toward where the wire meets the pad. And then when you feel or can see, it is much easier on a 402 to see when it pulls. And then you know, and then you just pull the tip straight off the end. Do not lift. So this is good. I like to face the LED toward me and put my scissors right up until they butt up against the LED. And snip. We're half done. Now, looking at the side, it has a bit of a curl to it, and I want to kind of straighten that out and I want this wire out of the way, so I kind of curl it out of the way. That's not bad. I meant to go into this first thing. This is just electrical tape, and it's what works for me. I cut a piece, cut the ends off, and then, reverse them and then glue it down to something like this. I like something that's raised, and this is just a little sanding bar. You can use, whatever. What I like about this surface is it's very gummy. It's just like your regular electrical tape, not the rubber tape. Okay. And what I usually do the first time that I didn't get a chance to say this time, before I started, I'm sorry, is that's how I do it. And when I put the LED down for the first time, it's really hard to see. There is a little green line on here, but I don't know what is positive or negative until after I'm done. On the 401s, I can tell because they're about twice as big. And that becomes very important when I'm doing a series of like step lights. Okay, so this is basically rinse and repeat. I'm going to just consider this to be like a practice. And you're looking at different aspects. You're looking at, is the insulation going to be parallel? It's not going to be perfectly because I've flattened it, so it would stick on the tape and not get in my way. So the only thing that's harder the second time is you want to control your side to side, just like you would have the first time, because you're trying to land on a pad. The problem you can get into that's probably going to ruin, it could possibly ruin the LED, is if you allow it to get too close to the other lead that I did already. So on the second one, that is a trick. And if you're holding things steady, like I'm always getting as close to my solder area as possible. Now I'm going to concentrate here. All right, we'll try that. See, it should be that smooth and simple. What happened is the LED, if this was the LED, instead of staying flat and the wires coming off one end, it kind of rolled like this. and the wire went from one side to the other side. And when it did go to the other side, I believe it touched the first wire, which is a huge no-no. And if you're careful in controlling your heat, you can pull back from that and not ruin your first solder. So I'm going to pull this off here. I don't know how well that'll pick up. But that, under magnification, looks good to me. Now what I like to do is pinch and hold on. Don't let go. I'm going to do the same thing. Just bring my scissors up to the LED and snip that off. Now, at this point, I'm going to move my fingers just a little bit. I don't know positive from negative, so we're going to check that. All right, so go ahead and point down here so you can see what I'm using. This, I've got it hooked up where I've got these two little tiny alligator clips. These things are awesome for all kinds of uses. So make sure you're all the way down. These are very, very sensitive LEDs. I've got a red and a black wire soldered on here, and on the back of my power pack, I put a little red dot, and I also put a little red dot here, so I know my direction when it's toward the red, and the red wire is on the terminal that's got the red dot next to it, because sometimes I disconnect this. Now I'm just going to hook this up, okay, and let it hang. Never let any of this weight or anything hang off that LED. That pad is less than half the size of the LED, and the width on that LED is just under a millimeter. It'll come right off. That's why I say pinch it and hold it. Okay, so I have them both hooked up and make sure they don't touch each other. I'm going to slowly turn the power up, and I mean slowly. There we go. You can pass that point and blow it out very quickly. Had the power off, so I'm going to edit that. So I've tested to see which is right, and my switch is in the positive position, so I know this is my positive wire. We'll turn the power off and turn the power pack off, disconnect the red wire, and then I make a note on this wire, and still pinching this, I like to put a small knot in it. Something that I can pull back apart, and typically it's closer to the end. That just tells me that wire's negative. Now, I didn't tell my wife this. We're on the fly, so she can just come over here and I'll either edit that or whatever. Okay, so we've got a good LED. The final step is pretty straightforward. If you've gotten to that point, then you are golden. And it just takes practice. Like I said, if this is new to you, I would not recommend starting out with a 201. These okay, so this last step, you can imagine, like I said, these pads are extremely small. So what I'm doing is I like to put a little bit of CA, a little drop on there, and then I'm on the back side, and I'm just lightly coating the back side of the LED, and then I'll put just enough. I'm not trying to glob it, just enough where between the wires I've kind of made a web of it, if that makes sense. So there's just enough where it goes from one wire to the other. So 3 different steps to think about. behind the LED, between the two bare wires, and a tiny bit between the two wires. And that's the easiest because they're pretty much touching already. Now you can go ahead and carefully lay this down. And when you do, just make sure it's not actually touching something. It's not. It's off the glass a little bit. So that needs to completely and totally dry. Like I said, that pad is so small that when you have a big old wire on it like this, it's almost like using a cheater bar to break a nut loose. But in this case, it's working against you. You do not want the leverage or weight of this wire on that pad. If you don't add a little CA like I did, then the only thing holding those on there is that tiny bit of solder on a very tiny pad. It will come off. Here's a little outtake from our soldering very small LEDs. You know, I've always considered ladybugs lucky. Although this is not a ladybug, it's, I guess, a Japanese beetle or whatever they call it. He just climbed right up on there. He's saying, you can do it.